Welcome on into Second and Short. My name is Tyler Louder. I am joined here with Aaron Benn. This is a brand new NFL podcast. We will be talking about all things NFL, off-season, in-season, and right now we're going to tackle the NFL draft. We're going to go division by division and talk about what each team has done successfully and what they have failed to do, as well as what we think they will do for the NFL draft. First off, Aaron, how you doing today?
I'm good. It's a bit early here in the morning, but we're just chilling with the coronavirus, and hope everyone's doing well.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I think this is like the best time to start a podcast because like we're all stuck inside our houses anyways. So we might as well talk to people any way we can.
Yeah, people need to hear us talk.
So let's talk about first news and notes. There's a lot of things that have happened in the NFL this week, especially with the coronavirus. Speaking of which, the NFL draft is potentially getting moved out of Vegas. It might be at a remote location. What do you think about like the whole NFL draft thing still going on? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, it's kind of crazy to cancel an event that big, but it's kind of to be expected. It's kind of like it needed to be done. Because you can't like have large gatherings or groups of people. My question is, the draft next year is in Cleveland, so I guess the question is, will Vegas get it back sometime, like in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple of friends that I went to school with that actually were going to get tickets down there because it's so cheap to go down there, and it's all standing room. Yeah, I wonder how that's going to happen and affect them. Another thing that was interesting is I saw a tweet. I wish I can give credit to this person, but they said anybody that has college eligibility should be allowed to go back in college for a year if they want due to this. You know, people can't they can't do their visits, they can't do physicals, they can't like do pro days. And because of that, some of these guys that like if you didn't see them at the combine, you're probably not going to draft them.
Yeah, that's true. Like a lot of there's always that like one or two combine monsters at every position that like just based on their combine performance get drafted in like the later rounds, or their stock goes up to the earlier rounds.
Yeah, and I think that also happens with pro days too, because we have guys like, you know, J.K. Dobbins from Ohio State. He didn't even run at the combine because he was healing up, and he was going to run at his pro day. That's probably going to affect him. What do you think about that? If like the NFL and NCAA worked together and allowed those like juniors and sophomores to go back to school?
I think it's interesting. I don't think it would happen in real life. I mean, I don't think it'll actually happen. I think they'll just, in the end, they'll be like, tough luck and stuff happens. But I think it's a good idea in theory.
Yeah, so let's move on from this. We'll talk more about how this event's going to happen, because it might even, you know, take place in some remote location with nobody in attendance. We're not going to get to see any Jets fans mad at their own team. And then we're not going to get to see Roger Goodell get booed, unless the NFL is funny enough to just like
instead of a laugh track, have a boo track.
Yeah, just because Goodell likes to play up to it. Okay, so let's move on to the Los Angeles Rams. And for the past couple of weeks, there's been speculation that this like random logo out there is actually their new logo. And everybody's like, no way, that logo looks horrible. And it gets released, and that is actually their logo. That LA with the Rams horn or whatever is their logo. What do you think about this? Like,
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people thought it was going to be like the Sonic the Hedgehog movie situation where they release a terrible version at first just so they can listen to all the fan criticism and then change it and then say, hey, look, we listened to the fans and changed everything. So when they released like the actual exact same logo, everyone's shocked because it looks bad.
Well, and the funny thing about it too is I didn't know if it was the Chargers logo
Yeah,
or the Rams logo, because it could be, it literally could be either or. I did actually like the new, like, the actual Ram
the Rams,
logo
like the old
itself.
school Rams
I thought
had.
that was yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. I like the take on it. It's, but that weird LA with that Rams horn curled around, it just looks weird. But then again, every time a team gets a new logo, everybody kind of looks at it weird.
Yeah, I mean, I saw there's a picture floating around that some graphic designer like put out that just it like points out everything wrong with the Rams logo. Like it like will like point to all of the design flaws and stuff like that from a graphic design standpoint. So I can send that to you after if you want.
Yeah, I would like to look at that. I know one person was complaining that the L and the A aren't parallel, so it like
Yeah,
throws
like
them
it's stuff that
off.
once you notice it, you can't not see it.
So speaking of not seeing, coming up this next year in the 2020, you will not be seeing Peyton Manning commentating on Monday Night Football. He clearly is somebody that they want because he's a big name. He is a smooth talker. He's funny and he's generally popular. But he doesn't want to be working with Monday Night Football. I mean, he can't be worse than Jason Witten. There's no way. No offense, Jason Witten, but it's just, we got Tony Romo. He was so good. Then we got Witten, and it was like a disaster. But I mean, Peyton Manning, do you think he's not doing this because eventually he's going to coach, or is he just wanting to just stay away from being on TV outside of his commercials?
I don't know. Maybe he's enjoying being retired and not doing anything. But I would love to, at some point to see him on TV commentating or broadcasting because he's got such a great football mind that I think he can give a lot to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's always key to have, like, I mean, all you always want former players of a sport commentating on an event, but I think having like really popular players just like makes it a little different. I don't know what it is. Like, I mean, there's some guys that commentate that I've never heard of, but they were former players, and then I hear Tony Romo, and I think Tony Romo is the greatest thing ever on commentary. But
Yeah, there's something about what like a player you watched growing up for a long time, and then suddenly you hear him talking to you like he's your best friend.
yeah, exactly. Now, I love how like you're setting me up with these things not on purpose, but people that are no longer best friends is the New England Patriots and longtime field goal kicker Stephen Gostkowski, three-time Super Bowl champion. He actually has participated in the fourth most playoff games
Wow.
in NFL history. Uh, yeah, and he's behind. I wish I had the graphic up. It's like he's behind Tom Brady, Jerry Rice, and somebody else, and he's sitting there at 28 games in the playoffs. And he didn't do so well last year, but it's just it's a big surprise because this isn't like a type of move that like the Patriots make. I know he's a kicker. I know he's a kicker, and people don't give kickers, like, they're not real people or whatever, but he's been their kicker for so long.
Well, I think it's actually kind of a common thing for Belichick to do with players who are seemingly like longtime players and they're like right in their prime. Like if you take Richard Seymour for example, or Vince Wilfork, they like cut them, trade them, seemingly in their prime, and then that seems to be like their peak, and then they start to slowly decline. Um, so that it seems to be the kind of that reminded me of those kinds of moves when they released Gostkowski.
Yeah, and I mean, it does make sense from a point that they always kind of get out of players' contracts at the right time when they can still sign a big contract, and the Patriots benefit from that compensation pick next year. And I mean, Gostkowski is going to sign for somewhere, and he's going to get paid as a kicker. It's inevitable. But two guys that are in opposite situations, the XFL, released that guys can actually sign with the NFL now. Talk about that. We have two quarterbacks that have signed NFL contracts from the XFL, two guys that were head to head in the MVP race. What do we got there for those news and notes?
So PJ Walker, who was probably the front runner for MVP, leading the undefeated Houston Roughnecks. He signed to Carolina, who had a plethora of quarterbacks until they just sent Kyle Allen to the Redskins for a fifth-round pick. Um, so PJ Walker's going to Carolina. He's more of a mobile quarterback. He can get it done with his feet. He's got a good throw on the run as well. He was in the NFL. He was on the Colts practice squad. Played a bit in the preseason a couple of years ago, but didn't end up making the team. The other quarterback is Jordan Damu. He was a quarterback for the St. Louis Battlehawks. He is not quite as mobile as PJ Walker, but he's got very good decision making, good accuracy. And he just signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, which should be a good learning experience for him behind Patrick Mahomes.
I mean, just with Andy Reid alone, being able to talk to you every day, that's gold right there. What's really interesting, and I don't know how, I didn't even notice this when people were talking about where Walker's maybe going to sign, is that Matt Rule was his head coach at Temple for 4 years. And I didn't even think about that connection. I'm excited to see what he's going to do because he was heavily endorsed by Andrew Luck to his father, to get an opportunity in the XFL. And then he showed up as soon as he got a chance to play. And while the XFL is not the NFL, there's plenty of NFL talent out there in those games. And it wasn't like he was like barely doing anything. He was dominating the entire game.
Yeah, this can only be good for the XFL if these two guys play well in the next level, because then more players will want to play for the XFL because they'll see it as like a jumping off point to get into the NFL.
I mean, and these two guys being quarterbacks don't even have to play. I mean, they can just be backups behind Patrick Mahomes and Teddy Bridgewater. But if they win the number 2 job, I mean, it pretty much made Carolina trade away their current backup, pending what happens at Cam Newton. Let's do one more news and notes, and then let's jump into these draft previews. So Travis Frederick, like the best center in the game right now, retired at 29, and in the past 13, 14 months, we've seen like 4 or 5 players retire at younger than 30. This is a trend that is continuing to grow. These guys are making their money. They're wanting to keep their health. It's a huge blow to the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, he was a big part of that offensive line that was so good, and people were saying, like, when Dak won the Rookie of the Year award, people were saying he won it because of the offensive line, because they gave him about an hour and a half to throw on every drop back. But, yeah, he was a big part of that offensive line and a good player.
Alrighty, so right now we are going to dive into these divisional previews. And they're also going to be kind of divisional reviews. As we're doing these, we'll update you on what's happened in free agency with these teams as well. So let's start in your territory. Let's start in the AFC South. We'll touch on your favorite team last. So let's touch on your second favorite team in the division, the Jacksonville Jaguars. So let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, this team ended up with, they were the 9th worst team in the NFL this past year. They had 2 different quarterback situations, with Minshew Magic kind of being this meme that turned into a successful quarterback overnight, all the whole time while everybody was praising Nick Foles signing there. And here we are. About a year later, Nick Foles has already been traded. They traded away A.J. Boye. They traded away Khalil Campbell, and they're getting rid of all these heavy contracts because, as I like to say, they were in salary cap hell because they were right up against it, and they're just getting rid of these guys. Now, however, they've been getting a lot for these guys as well, and they've been kind of picking them up. What have they added compared to their losses?
Well, mostly what they've added is draft picks and cap room. They got a 5th-round pick for Calais Campbell, which may not seem a lot, but you also have to add in the fact that they were able to offload his contract. So that gives them more room to play with the cap. A.J. Boye, I think, was a 4th-round pick. Am I right? Yeah. So it's like these mid to late round picks that add up. And don't forget they have 2 first round picks this year with the Jalen Ramsey trade. So they have the 9th and the 20th pick. So I think they're kind of looking to build for the future. It looks like they're banking on Minshew to be the guy for them next year and going forward. And I think they were just happy to get rid of Nick Foles and his contract.
Yeah, they're eating a lot of dead cap this year. It's just a little bit over 30 million in dead cap. That will come off their books. I mean, if this is a rebuilding team, dead cap really doesn't mean anything to you. You can always get out of that dead cap the next year and move forward. Now, they did add linebacker Joe Shorbert out of the Cleveland Browns, who isn't that great of a coverage guy, but he brings down offensive players. He's good at wrapping up. He's good at getting tackles. They got defensive end Rodney Gunter, which I think is kind of like an insurance policy if they can't keep Yannick, because I feel like that situation is still up in the air. He hasn't signed his franchise tag. He could be traded literally at any minute if a team will take him. I mean, we just saw what happened with the team we'll talk about here in a second, the Indianapolis Colts. They traded for a big-name defensive lineman. So I don't see why Yannick couldn't get traded in that same...
Yeah, and I think it looks like he's talking about holding out if he doesn't get traded. Because a lot of guys don't want to play under the franchise tag, like Le'Veon Bell a couple of years ago. So we'll see what happens with that.
Well, let's talk about that real quick before we step away from that. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, players not wanting to play, like, in their prime, they're sacrificing a prime year because they want to have a little bit of control of their contract.
I can't really speak 100% for them because I'm not a professional player, obviously. But it is a lot of money for 1 year. Like, you're getting paid a top 5 contract for 1 year. And if you play that well, then you get another long-term contract. So you're kind of like betting on yourself that you're going to play well and get a long contract. But I understand why players don't want it. They want that long contract right now because they feel like they've proven themselves right now. And especially in the case of running backs, it also takes away, because running backs have a short career anyways. So like Le'Veon Bell, like Derrick Henry, who got over 300 touches last year and will probably get the same amount of touches this year on the franchise tag unless they get a long-term contract. So I understand why players hold out.
Yeah, and I think Yannick is in the best he plays one of the best positions to hold out because defensive ends do play into their 30s. They do seem to maintain this value year in and year out because in my opinion, there's 4 things a team needs to be competitive. They need a top-notch quarterback. They need a great left tackle. They need a great pass rusher, and they need a great cornerback. If they can have like those 4 things, then I think that they can dominate every level of the game where you can have role players everywhere else. So Yannick being young enough where he's 25, 26, I think he'll be 26 when the season starts, is that he can keep this control. If he sits out, he sits out. In my opinion, you should always play on the franchise tag because let's say they're going to franchise you the next year. Well, that actually increases more than what you're making, and it forces their hand to the point where you will be a free agent. So it'll be interesting to see. Melvin Gordon, some say, cost himself money by not taking that deal, but we'll get to that when we talk about the Chargers. So you said it right here. The Jaguars have a lot more cap, a lot of draft picks. They actually have, they have 2 picks in the first round, 1 in the second and third, and then they have 2 picks in each of the 4th, 5th, and 6th round. So with 11 picks right now is what I have. I think that total is going to keep going up.
Yeah, and these are guys that they'll sign to be like backup players, depth, like role players and stuff like that until they can get their like high level players back and get their own like stars.
So let's project here for a second, and we're gonna do this with every team. They're drafting 9 and 20. We'll say for every team, we'll talk about their first 2 picks. What do they need to do to be successful with their first 2 picks? You don't got to give me a player, but like you can give me a position or a move that you want them to do. Like, what should they do if they want to build on this success?
Well, they have a lot of needs. So I think at 9, they're in a position to grab a top player at a lot of positions. I think if it was me, I'd probably go offensive line and get some help for guard Minshew. At 20, it's more like kind of later round for the first round. I think they could probably. I would look for like a cornerback. There's some pretty good cornerback depth in this draft, or because they lost Ramsey and Bouye. Or they could go best player available if they're not liking us. If they had their eyes on a specific player and he's gone, just draft the best player available that they at a position they need, of course.
Yeah, and I think they're in a prime spot at 20 to be one of those teams that trades back, because there's going to be somebody at the top 10 in the draft that wants a quarterback, and they're not going to get him. And they're going to want to jump in to the first round to get that fifth-year option. I think 20 is high, but I think 20 is where we see that range of teams that are willing to jump in from their second-round pick and move on. And the Jags, obviously, they know what they're doing. They're trying to collect. They're going to retool. And so, yeah, that's very possible. And I agree. I think offensive line at the first pick is crucial. And with all this talk on quarterbacks and these wide receivers and these stud Isaiah Simmons and Jeff Okuda's on the defensive side, they could have the best offensive tackle fall to them at 9.
Yeah, I could see a trade happening. I could see a really top tier player falling to them at 9. Anything could happen with them.
So let's move on to the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans it's not even them. Bill O'Brien is getting mocked all across Twitter, all across Reddit, all social media, probably in NFL locker rooms if they were all there. They didn't have a first-round pick coming into this draft. They traded it away for Larry Tunsil to beef up that offensive line last year. And now they trade away DeAndre Hopkins, one of, if not the best wide receiver right now in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins should be, in my opinion, he's untradeable. Like, he top 3 wide receiver in the league, and they traded him away for a second-round pick and David Johnson, who was good a few years ago, and then he got hurt, and then he didn't play as well. Some say it's because of the offensive scheme, but I'm not. This ain't it, Chief.
Yeah, I find it very odd. Now there's reports out there that DeAndre Hopkins was on the verge of potentially holding out, dealing with a contract situation, that he wanted to make more money, but that I think could also be smokescreen to make the Texans look better, saying like we had to do it, we were up against the wall.
But I mean, it's DeAndre Hopkins. You pay that guy. You got to pay him.
I agree. I agree exactly, because he's the type of guy that like the best receivers in the NFL draft every year are like getting compared to, saying if they're the best they can be DeAndre Hopkins. And I think when you have a guy that's sitting at that high with that much talent, I mean, before Deshaun Watson, it seemed like DeAndre Hopkins could have anybody at quarterback and he could produce for you. It didn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, he got 900 yards with Brock Osweiler throwing to him, so
that's pretty impressive, actually. And when you say it like that, that's like one of those quarterbacks when you look back in the day, like how we look at like Rex Grossman, like our kids are gonna look at Brock Osweiler just like the same way. Now, let's not take away from the positives here. Let's find positives for the Texans. They did get a second round pick, so now they're gonna be drafting at 40. Which is pretty high in the second round. So they have two picks in the top 57. They got David Johnson, so they got a better starting running back than what they had. They got Randall Cobb in free agency, and they got safety Jalen Watkins. So losing DeAndre Hopkins is not good. However, they do have some pieces to pick up and move forward. And if Deshaun Watson is the real deal, and he's going to be the real deal for a while, maybe Will Fuller can step up and become that number one wide receiver, and he won't just be a deep threat.
Yeah, and I mean, Randall Cobb, he's a bit older now, but he's still a decent number 2, number 3 guy. And David Johnson, he can line up in the slot. He can line up out wide as well if you need. So they still have options.
I mean, and on top of that, they have Duke Johnson in the backfield as well as the number 2 running back, and having these options with Stills and Fuller being burners, and Cobb can play underneath, and the running backs play underneath. This might be a sneaky team where it's just kind of like, it's all committee. It's all committee instead of Hopkins doing it all.
Yeah, and as long as Deshaun Watson's playing, you can't really count them out.
I agree. So the Texans have 8 draft picks. Like we said, their first 2 picks are pick 40, 57. Kind of draft needs right now are they still need an edge rusher. They haven't been able to replace the opposite side of J.J. Watt since losing Clowney. Plus, J.J. Watt is not healthy. He can't stay healthy. So not only are you trying to find a partner for him, you're trying to find his backup that could step in and start. They could use more cornerback help. Ever since they've been losing these guys, Kevin Johnson's not there anymore. They need somebody to man the outside for them. And I kind of put wide receiver because I think everybody they have is a second wide receiver or a third wide receiver option. They could use a number 1, but I don't think they're going to draft one early. Let's talk about that. Pick 40, pick 57. What should the Texans do? Is this a trade-up situation?
Well, I think if you trade up, they just keep trading their first-round picks. So if they trade up, they're going to be trading like their first-round pick the next year. So it's kind of like a never-ending cycle. What I do think, and we didn't mention this, they still have a big need, I think, at offensive line. Because they got Laramie Tunsil, who is one player, but Deshaun Watson took a lot of sacks last year. And I really think they need to shore up the offensive line. Other than that, I would probably take edge as well. I think wide receiver, you can basically, you don't have to use a real high draft pick on wide receiver this year. See what you got with your other guys. But edge and offensive line, I think, are their biggest needs.
Yeah, and if they can address, both sides of those lines for their team with their first 2 picks, I think that this could turn the tide a little bit for them and kind of make their fans a little bit happier. However, the fans are not going to be happy for a while, probably until Bill O'Brien's gone, especially when DeAndre Hopkins goes off for 1,300 yards this year.
I think fans are it sounds like they're done with Bill O'Brien. They're done with not having a GM, and we'll see what happens with that this year.
Let's move to the Indianapolis Colts. This is a team for the past 3-4 years has been building through the draft, and they had Andrew Luck, and this team is like ready to make it far. And I actually thought last year, before the whole Luck news happened, I thought they could have made a deep run in the playoffs. Easily could make the AFC Championship game with that roster. They had like $85 million in cap space still in free agency, but then they decided to buy nobody outside of Devin Funchess for some reason. So Luck retires. They signed Brissett to like a favorable $15 million deal, which is still very cheap. They have an okay season. They get... They have the 13th pick, and they still have all this cap space going in this next year. And now they're actually spending it. I think they have this realization, like, we've got to actually start trying to win sooner or later. And they really haven't lost anybody, but they brought in 3 big names.
Yeah, they brought in Anthony Costanzo to shore up the offensive line. Traded their first round, the 13th pick, to the Niners for DeForest Buckner, which is a pretty big move. And he'll play that defensive line. And then the bigger news that people were waiting for was Phillip Rivers signing there, which kind of seems like a good fit for Phillip Rivers. He's got a better line there than he did in Los Angeles. All they really need is some weapons to give him.
Yeah, I agree, and that's kind of where I've been like sitting and looking at all this. That they probably need to go out and get a wide receiver. Hilton's kind of breaking down, and if they can keep him, that would keep him healthy. That'd be good. One thing I did totally miss over because it's just happened. They did lose Eric Ebron at tight end, which we'll see if that affects him as much. I think Jack Doyle, a healthy Jack Doyle, is a great tight end for somebody like Phillip Rivers. If they can get another wide receiver, Paris Campbell will be coming back into his second year. Hilton Campbell and some wide receiver at pick 34. That's probably going to be someone like Jalen Ragor or Justin Jefferson. There's some options they could have there. Mims could be an excellent pick right there as well. This team needs to make the playoffs. The Texans kind of took a step back, I think, and I think the Colts are taking a step forward at the same time. With the Tennessee Titans still kind of just moving lateral, keeping all their players. We'll talk about them in a second. I think the Colts have to make the playoffs now. And, I mean, with Phillip Rivers, they have a 2-year window, I think.
They're in win-now mode at the moment, and they want to win with Phillip Rivers at the helm, and I agree, he's got maximum 2 years to do that.
So give me your thoughts on their blockbuster trade of sending their first-round pick number 13, in one of the most star-studded drafts we've had in years. Not just a lot of good running backs or good quarterbacks, but it seems like every position is stacked. Now they have to pay this guy $21 million.
Yeah, I at first thought it was a decent trade for the Colts. They get a solid all-pro player. They know what they're gonna get from him. They know he's good. But on the other hand, you see guys like Jarrell Casey getting traded for a 7th-round pick, he's not on the same level as DeForest Buckner anymore, but he's still a decent player. He's very good on the interior defensive line. So it seems like they might have overpaid, with not just with the contract, but also with a first-round pick. I guess you can't really judge trades until you see what comes out of the pick that was traded, how they play and everything, but it seems like a bit much.
Yeah, it just seemed like with a team that needed a wide receiver, or even they got DeForest Buckner, who could profile as a 3-technique defensive lineman. Pick number 13 was prime real estate for somebody like Jerry Jeudy, or Javon Clinshaw out of South Carolina that plays defensive tackle. They could have got one of these guys at this position and saved money. I think the reason why they were so comfortable doing this trade is they own the Redskins' 2nd-round pick number 34. So, even trading this, they still have 2 picks in the top 44.
Yeah, 34, there's not a whole lot of difference between picking 32, which is technically first round, and 33, 34, which is technically second round. So,
and I actually was talking to somebody on Twitter today, because somebody talked about that trade we talked about with Kyle Allen going to the Redskins for a 5th, and they were like, "That's an early 5th. It's practically a 4th." And somebody asked the question is when should you actually say that, and when shouldn't you say that? This is not a real thing to pick on, but when can you say it's practically that pick? And with compensation picks, the 2nd pick in the 5th round is actually after the 4th round with all the compensation picks is pick 15, it seems like. So I just made the statement that it's the first 3 or 4 picks in the 2nd round and 3rd round, you can kind of say are basically that.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
Nonetheless, the Colts are in a great position. I think if Buckner pans out, they have a upgraded quarterback in their eyes, which they probably do. They kept Anthony Costanzo, which is key. Rivers is old, you need to keep him healthy. If they can land on both their first 2 picks and kind of get starters or, second strings that get lots of playtime, this team could continue to take the right steps forward. All right, so let's dive into your bread and butter. Let's dive into something you pay attention to more than the rest of these teams. Let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans are coming off, a so-so season, a very slow start. It was a roller coaster. They have one quarterback, switch to another quarterback, and it's just uphill, the time of their lives. They hit the playoffs running, literally, and they just run the ball down everybody's throats until they ran into the Kansas City Chiefs. And you could argue the Titans would have won the Super Bowl had they not lost to the Super Bowl champions. I like to say that thing, if you're going to lose to somebody, at least lose the team that wins it all.
Yeah, I'm a Titans fan. So I'm a bit biased, but it was kind of a up and down season. Before the season, we were talking about how if Marcus Mariota didn't pan out, then at least we'd be in prime position to draft a quarterback. And then once they benched him, put in Ryan Tannehill, and Ryan Tannehill went off. I think after the season, we all wanted to keep him around, which they did, signed him to a pretty team-friendly deal. They can cut him after a couple of years if needed. And we also signed Vic Beasley from the Falcons to play edge. We also, players that we lost, I talked about trading Jarrell Casey for a 7th-round pick to the Broncos. We lost Jack Conklin, who was a decent offensive tackle. He signed with the Browns.
Those moves right there, I think, kind of show up what we've been talking. At least you and I off of this podcast, we're talking about and everything that the Titans do need some edge rushers. They do, and we're still thinking that potentially Jadeveon Clowney could show up on their doorstep as well. Adding Vic Beasley is one of those guys that, as we were saying before, that defenders might just need to play in like a new team. They just need to change it up, play in a different style, a new coach, and it all just clicks. Which if it does, the Titans they're hitting gold if Beasley is what he was supposed to be coming out of college. Keeping Ryan Tannehill is great because he was great for A.J. Brown's rookie year. He kind of made Corey Davis look better than he had the previous years. I think he was a better quarterback for him. I do think losing Conklin is a big deal just because having competent starters at the tackle position is hard to find. However, we keep talking about this draft is loaded everywhere, and tackle has legit 6-7 guys that could get drafted. And I think the Titans sitting at pick 29 will kind of just get the benefits of, and I think you'll agree with this, being able to just to go best player available and just kind of coast their way through everything and just take the best option. But
well, yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I kind of don't think we'll take an offensive tackle because we've had Dennis Kelly on the team for a while, who has played pretty well, substituting either on the left or the right for injured players.
What do you think on that?
The Titans just signed him to a new deal. I think they're expecting him to start at the right tackle spot. But I agree. I think at the 29th pick, it's best player available. Ever since John Robinson, their GM, has come to Tennessee, they've kind of adopted like the Patriots mentality in terms with drafting and dealing with players. We talked about earlier how the Pats cut or trade cornerstone franchise players in their prime. That's kind of exactly what he did with Jarrell Casey. So I think they're going to draft best player available. I'd hope to see them pick up edge because, as you said, we do need edge pretty bad. But, I mean, at the 29th pick, anything could happen, really.
And I do think in the later rounds that they will kind of establish a secondary running back, especially with how loaded this draft class is. If they can get a nice pass-catching running back to complement Henry, since they did lose Dion Lewis, I think that'd be a good thing for them. So, I mean, yeah, as long as they can get another pass rusher. But then again, I mean, if they sign Clowney, they don't really need to draft edge at 29. They can shift over to defensive back and get, a nice corner and everything. So I think the Titans still have some free agency money, and I don't think they're done signing players that are going to impact their team.
And the Jarrell Casey trade was exactly that. It was clearing cap space, and once that happened, a lot of the fans were pretty sure they're going to make a move for Jadeveon Clowney.
Alrighty, well, that is going to do it for our premiere episode of Second and Short. This is something that we're just going to do to kind of provide content for anybody that is a fan of the NFL, even if it's small, small town, big national. If you're going to catch us on YouTube and everything, if you're going to catch us on the air at KBHU, the radio station I assist at, we're here to provide entertainment for you guys during this situation. Next, we will be tackling the NFC South, which has been loaded with playmakers signing to new teams, all in that division. So that'll be fun to talk about in our next episode. So I am Tyler Louder. He is Aaron Benn. Again, this is Second and Short. Thank you guys for tuning on in, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks. We've been great.